Welcome to The Explainer. You know that feeling you get at the grocery store or the gas pump? That little nagging thought in the back of your head that your money just doesn't stretch as far as it used to? Today, we're going to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, it's the question that's probably been on your mind a lot lately. Why does everything feel so much more expensive? From your morning coffee to your monthly rent, it seems like prices only ever move in one direction, up. It's frustrating for sure, and today we're going to break down the powerful economic force that's behind it all.
Okay, let's put some real numbers to this feeling. Just think back to the year 2000. A burger, that might have cost you about $2. Today, that same burger is probably closer to $6. Or how about a movie ticket? What used to be a $5 bill is now easily over 10. So no, you're not imagining it. The actual value of your money has changed.
So, what's the deal here? What's the engine driving all these price hikes? Well, the one-word answer is inflation. But what does that actually mean? And what gets that engine revved up in the first place? Let's dive in. All right, so at its simplest, inflation is just the speed at which prices are going up. And as that happens, every single dollar you have buys a little bit less. So the key isn't just that things get more expensive, it's that your money itself is losing its power.
Okay, so what's making prices go up? I promise it's not some big secret conspiracy. It really comes down to a few key economic forces that are pretty much always in play, nudging prices upward. So you can usually trace it back to one of four main causes. First, you've got what's called demand pull, which is basically too many people chasing after too few things. Second is cost push, where it just costs more to make stuff. Then there's something called a wage price spiral. That's a whole other loop. And finally, sometimes there's just too much money floating around in the economy. For today, we're going to zero in on the first two, because they're the ones you see most often.
Okay, let's tackle that first one, demand pull inflation. Picture this. A massive tornado just rips through and wipes out most of the country's corn crop. All of a sudden, you've got way less corn, but the same number of people who want to buy it. What happens? A bidding war, right? That intense competition literally pulls the price of corn way. All right, let's stick with this corn thing for a second and talk about cost push inflation. Now think about the guy who sells popcorn at the movie theater. Thanks to that tornado, the price of his number one ingredient, corn, just went through the roof. To stay in business, he has no choice but to charge you more for that bucket of popcorn. See? The higher cost of making the product gets pushed onto you, the customer. So how do we get those official numbers we hear about on the news? Well, economists have this thing called the Consumer Price Index, or the CPI. They basically create a virtual shopping cart, a basket of common stuff people buy, like bread, milk, eggs, even a movie ticket. Then they just track how much it costs to buy that whole basket over time. Here you can see it went from $30 to $30.90 in 1 year. And that change in price is how we get our inflation rate. In our little example, the price went up 90 cents on a $30 basket. Do the math, and boom, that's a 3% inflation rate for the year. When you hear the news talking about inflation, this is exactly what they're doing, just with a much bigger shopping basket. So, if rising prices are such a pain, you're probably thinking, shouldn't we aim for zero inflation? Or hey, even better, why not have prices go down? It sounds like a great idea, right? But in reality, that's a recipe for total economic disaster. Let me show you why. You see, it's all about avoiding two really dangerous extremes. On one side, you've got deflation. That's when prices actually fall. Sounds amazing, but it's terrible because everyone stops buying things thinking, hey, it'll be cheaper next week. The whole economy grinds to a halt. That's a big part of what caused the Great Depression. Then you have the other nightmare scenario, hyperinflation. This is when prices skyrocket, sometimes even hourly, and your money basically becomes worthless paper. Think modern Venezuela. So the real goal is to find that Goldilocks zone. Not too hot, not too cold, but just right. For most central banks, that sweet spot is a small, steady inflation rate of around 2 to 3% a year. It's just enough to nudge people to spend and invest, instead of stuffing cash under the mattress, which keeps the whole economic engine humming along nicely. Okay, so if 2 to 3% is the target, how do you actually keep the economy there? How do you tame that inflation beast when it starts to roar? Well, this is where the big guns come in, the central banks. The number one weapon in a central bank's arsenal is interest rates. When inflation gets too high, they'll crank up those rates. Suddenly, borrowing money gets more expensive. For a car, a house, for a business to expand. And what happens when it's expensive to borrow? People and businesses spend less. That cools down demand across the board, and voila, prices stop rising so fast.
All right, so that's the big picture stuff, how the experts try to manage the economy. But that brings it all back to a really important question for you and me. With prices always going up, what can we do to stop our own hard-earned money from just fading away?
You know, we're all told from the time we're kids that saving money is a great habit. And it is. But here's the catch. If you just let that cash sit in a savings account or a piggy bank, inflation is like a little mouse nibbling away at its value, day after day, year after year. To really protect your future, your money can't just sit there, it has to grow.
Let me show you what I mean with a quick story. The tale of three savers, Tony, Jack, and Bob. Back in 2014, they each start with $1,000. Tony, being cautious, puts his in a savings account. Jack buys gold. And Bob? Bob invests his in the stock market. Now, fast forward 10 years. The results are, honestly, they're staggering. Tony's money has barely budged. Jack did okay, but Bob's investment has grown like crazy. It's a perfect example of the power of making your money work for you.
And the magic number here is what we call real return. It's super simple. You just take whatever your investment earned and then subtract the rate of inflation. So Bob's stocks had this amazing 25% average return. After you take away that 2% inflation hit, his real return was a massive 23%. Jack's gold also came out ahead of inflation, which is great. But look at poor Tony. The 1% interest from his savings account couldn't even keep up with 2% inflation. He was actually losing purchasing power every single year.
And that really brings us to the final and maybe the most important question of all. Inflation isn't going anywhere. It's a constant force in our economy. Understanding what it is, that's step one. The real question you have to ask yourself now is your money keeping up?